High above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. Happy 4th of July weekend. Without further ado, I want to bring back a cat who last time I had him on the show was over 8 years ago, and through that time I've found my voice thanks to cats like him and Arthur Adams and Leland Sklar and Oscar Brashear and the skipper Henry Franklin, and I've been able to cull a lot of content about our cultural history from a lot of different areas, rhythm and spirit, and how to create amazing spiritual music and have a conversation on the bandstand. George Bohanon, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you so much, Jake. It's good to be back.
It's wonderful to hear your voice, man, and thank you for taking the time. I wanted to know if you had a chance to play with Washboard Willie back in your Detroit days.
Well, let's see. Washboard was there. I don't remember any actual gigs with him, but I had seen him perform, and he was a wow, Washboard Willie. You really can pull him out.
Oh, I'm going to stretch you back. No, because, Jamerson, I think that was Jamerson's favorite cat, right? He loved him.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was beautiful. I mean, that's where the rhythms came from, Washboard Willie. He could make that thing sound like a whole set of drums and congas and everything else. What a talent. But there's so few people who would even know him. That's the shame of it all, because there was no real outlet for him, like recording. But all the cats knew him.
Would you say he was more like a street performer, or like how did he? Was that his gig? I mean, I guess because I don't care if it was you, Kirk Lightsey, Dennis Coffey, Jamerson. I mean, everybody loved this guy. I mean, what was it like? I mean, you just go down to the corner and be playing there? I mean, he wasn't on Motown dates or anything, obviously.
He wasn't on any of the dates, but he would put gigs together, or there would be bands, blues bands, and Washboard would be with them, playing at some of the local clubs, like 20 Grand at the time, which they featured a good variety of like organ trios and different configurations. And Washboard was really popular through that, with that group of people. He was not we wouldn't think him of a jazz cat at all, but he just was a rhythm cat. I mean, he created such, and who else played the washboard? I mean, who else? I mean, he was very unique.
Wow.
But I don't remember exactly where. I think I was about 25, I guess. Yeah, so that's been a while since I even heard his name.
Well, no, because I realize I want to. I mean, this is such a high honor because I've been waiting to do part two with George Bohanon, absolutely legendary cat. I'm going to read you this line, this quote from one of my interviews, and then have you riff on it. This is from Wendell Harrison. He said, I used to play these bohemian coffee houses. Cats would recite poetry, and we'd play behind them high on peyote and hash. Guys like Ray McKinney, who would recite poetry, he played at a place in Detroit called the Minor Key, which was a department store that the hippies got. They turned it into a coffee shop. They put up curtains to deal with the sun, and all kind of poets would come in and recite poetry. And they had jazz musicians backing them up. And I said, I know Bohanon was part of this. I mean, it was so amazingly what a beautiful, I know nobody was getting rich off this stuff, man, but it really, at a certain point in our cultural history, whether people realize it or not, music made sense. And I just wanted you to talk about maybe enlighten me if I'm just living in a fantasy world or not. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the collective unity of the artists in Detroit at that time?
Well, that thing about Detroit was there was such a great variety of musicians and artists who all had general respect for each other. Minor Key was really a nice, easy place. It kind of reminded me of the early world stage here. So you had everybody came there to do their creative thing. We had artists who were visual artists come down and do some training while you're playing, and you got you've got spoken word guys just drift in, and it was real loose, but really, really important because you knew that when you went to the minor key, it was honest music, or it was an honest presentation, and it wasn't set. There was nothing set. You could go in there and just happen to be a guy in there playing conga drums, and then pretty soon somebody else would come in and start singing to it. It was beautiful, the minor key. I'd forgotten. The thing is, when you get to my age, my recall is not as sharp as it was, unfortunately.
You're doing fine, dude. No, I know it's not going to be detailed, but I mean, like, the point is that, I just got off the phone with a wonderful singer, and she also books musicians. I guess my point is, even put the cost of living was much more reasonable. But would you say that it's funny because I just wonder at a certain point in Detroit, were you actually making more money than your folks?
Well, I was definitely at one point, especially when I got on staff. Well, I worked too, man. I worked at Plymouth plant building cars.
Wow.
I did what I had to do. I worked on the assembly line long enough to, I think it was 13 weeks, because after that you could get unemployment. So I say, okay, I can do that. But then I was fortunate that I always had a gig when I got serious about it. I always, there were several clubs there that would rotate and have me there. And one of them, was like the world. I keep saying the world stage. That's here in LA. It's really in my head. Billy Higgins.
Yeah, Billy Higgins' club, definitely.
Yeah, and it's still doing good too. But it's been a struggle. Man, you wouldn't think so because it's so unique, and there are not like 20 of them. There's one. But yet still getting the support to keep it active and actually pay musicians to play has been a struggle. But they're still on the map. But anyway, in Detroit, there was several clubs, minor key being one, but Levert's Lounge. Levert kept a rotation going of local cats, and I played like Wendell Harrison. We played together quite a bit. I wrote some stuff because Wendell had a gig. He had a group of woodwinds and clarinets and all, and it was kind of a New Orleans kind of a hit, and I did some arrangements for him with that band. But he's always been one of the guys that was steadfast, very studied the music, very serious about his music.
Definitely.
And a great saxophone player, but he played the jazz scene. But Wendell had a thing. He and Phil Ramlin on trombone.
Oh my God! Give me a break. Wendell wound up with Sun Ra when Sun Ra had his own record company. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
Right. Yeah, and the guys always started their own companies, and they were very, aggressive as far as finding ways to promote their music. And there was Kenny Cox there had Strata Records, created his own record company, so that we could find ways to record the cats. And but the minor key was in that mix.
Well, no, I also wanted to ask you about. There's a couple. I just know. Did you have a chance to play with any of the titans at the West End Cafe, like Train or Youssef or any of those guys? Because the West End Cafe, Lightsey went there one time, and he said he had an out-of-body experience watching Coltrane play. It was with Miles. He was still with Miles, but he showed up for the late night jam. Miles wasn't there, and it was just Youssef and Train, and they just took Lightsey out of his body.
Yeah, well, we could always depend on the going to the
West End.
West End, because that was Yusuf's home pretty much. He had a steady thing there, after hours, and but I used to certainly go there and set in and play with Yusuf and the cats. I didn't have the fortune of seeing Train in any live situation. I just didn't. Our paths didn't cross that way. I played in bands that when I was with Chico Hamilton, and we shared the stage with Miles Davis and things. And I got to know him, and then we hung out, like went to the Grand Prix in San Francisco together, things like that.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
it all went in different directions rather than straight to the music. But the West End was a nice spot because you could always. It was very pure, and Yusuf was, that was before he was Yusuf Lateef, and he was a blues player. I mean, he could honk and walk the bar.
Right. He was that's. I want to talk to Bohanon about that. Where do you fall on that? Because, like Cannon, Train, Sonny, Yusef, they all walked the bar, right? They were all R&B guys before they were beboppers. So I feel like that was a little before your time. Am I right or wrong about that?
A little before my time. Like I said, when I started playing, just getting out of high school, like in 54 and 55, up till about 59, 5 years there, playing steadily in town mostly. Not even, just kind of getting my thing together. But then I had groups, as I said, we had groups that were well respected because the cats from New York always come through there. And then they knew who the guys were that were playing. And so they come and hear our band. We had arrangements, and I had a group with a guy named Ronnie Fields for a while. Me and Ronnie were just, always like trombone and tenor together.
Sure.
And so I got a chance. A lot of guys came to hear us, but I didn't get a chance to hear Train, until, I heard Sonny Rollins and cats like that in New York as I was moving around. But unfortunately, I didn't share the bandstand with them. No.
Because I'm trying to figure out Bohanon. I mean, the most legendary career in the studio. But I mean, did you fall into because there were like these different tiers. It was like Donald Byrd, Kenny Burrell, maybe, and then that was a Detroit mix, and then Elvin was somewhere in there. Pepper Adams. I mean, what was your group?
Curtis Fuller was right ahead of me.
Oh, so yeah, sorry, Fuller.
Me and Curtis were tight. Me and Louis Hayes were very tight. We rehearsed in this basement all day long.
Oh my God, he told me that. I interviewed Louis. He told me, I cannot believe. Oh my, this is great. Continue, please. So Louis and Fuller. I mean, is it fair to say Fuller was? Was he the one that kind of, you used this great term before, honest music? Can you talk about how you learned, what is honest music, and how you learned to play it?
It wasn't always scripted. We didn't have the real book and all of the tools they have today. We heard the guys play, and we had listened to the record, and we'd play the record over and over, learn the melody the way he played it, and that's the way we played it. It was not. And a lot of, and then later on, guys, you come in, you ask to play a tune, and they play it, maybe correct, maybe not. But if you were on the scene and you call I Remember April, everybody know how to play I Remember April. We didn't have to talk about it. It was honest, because we'd have to say, well, right there we're going to play, and then at the bridge we're going to swing it and we're going to take it. You don't have to do any of that. You say I Remember April. Play the tune, and it would become very creative, because every time you played it, you would play it different.
Exactly. That's the magic of, that is what the magic of you guys, man. You never played the same song the same way once. Right.
and that's such a wonderful feeling, because, like I said, you don't have time to think about it. It's honest. It comes straight off the top. You trust it. You've heard it enough. It's within your psyche. You know that tune. And so it's a great feeling, Jake. It's hard to describe because I've been doing it so long, but I still get the same feeling. You get that thing when that guy call a tune, and we haven't played it in 20 years, but hey, yeah, let's play that.
It's so great, man. I mean, oh my God. I mean,
it's going to be a trip. It's going to be a trip. Because I always say, once you have the ingredients right, and that is the guys who you trust
Right.
and trust you,
Right.
and you're comfortable with. Hey, man, like we call it Kirk Lightsey and Cecil McBee, and even like George Goldsmith was around the time drummer, man. We just had fun playing music, but it wasn't a thing where we could retire on. Still had to supplement it if we wanted to a particular lifestyle, and that's why I was very, very fortunate to, as I said, follow Curtis around, and he trusted me a lot. And we've spoken about it, even in recent years. He's talked about, man, I wouldn't let everybody hang with me, but you wouldn't let me go, man.
Dude, he has been. Fuller. This is so important. I mean, did you also learn? I mean, obviously, George Bohanon, talking George. I mean, you were surrounded by so many. We look at him now as iconic figures, but I mean, do you remember? It doesn't have to be with Fuller, but nobody, when was the first time you realized that this music that is so treasured and hallowed and spiritual, even if you're playing a standard, when did you realize that this music was really a matter of life and death? I'm talking about the jazz life that you're playing as if your life depended on it. Was there something early in your life that you still can harken back to, and you're like, God, I really laid it all out?
Listen, when I knew that I was going to play the trombone, I was really young, Jake. I was about 8 or 9 years old when I saw the trombone in a church. I might have told you about that before.
No.
Well, I went to a sanctified church with a friend of mine, and they had 2 trombone players, a couple saxophone players, and I was a kid. My mother let me go to visit this church with my friend Melvin. And man, I walked into that place. I had a trombone because I, tried to play it in junior high and high school, but nothing serious. But when I walked in and heard that music in that context, they were spirituals, but the energy was something that I had never experienced before. There was an energy that hit me, and I said, "Wow, this is something else." I mean, I heard music on the radio. You feel pretty good, but to hear that kind of sincerity and spirituality, something happened to me then. That's when I knew I better get on the trombone and play the trombone. I said, I can do that. I can do that for the rest of my life.
I just want to stop you right there. This is amazing because you're telling me this was like in a rural part of outside of Detroit, a sanctified church somewhere in the.
It wasn't that far out, but it was on the east side, and I was a west sider, and I'm just a kid. I'm young, and so when 8, 9 years old when I went over to that church, and so that's when I really felt the spirituality of the music.
Oh,
that's what I felt. I mean, I cried and I begged. I'm like, Dad, man, I gotta have one of those horns, man. And they didn't know what I'm talking about. What a horn? You and a horn? And my mother is saying, hey, honey, horn. We need some linoleum for the kitchen floor.
No, wait. Here, but let me ask you. This is so insane because when I interviewed Jabo Starks and Clyde Stubblefield, rest in peace, both of them, don't you think that it had? First of all, I've never heard of a trombone in a sanctified church. I know guitars were in there and tambourines, but what about there was no trap set, right? I mean, people were doing very different kinds of diaspora hand clapping. They weren't necessarily clapping on the 2 and 4. It was maybe on the 3 and 4. Can you talk about the rhythms? I think that's where the spirituality came from. I think
so. Because it was free.
Yeah,
it was pretty free. I mean, we didn't like you said, there was no trap set keeping it, locking in on 2 and 4, but the just swaying with the energy, it would land in the pocket. It was where it was supposed to be. And it was
is
a lot
so
easier.
great.
And then you begin to hear all the. Later on, you realize it's just a continuation of the African rhythms. I mean, they come and all they come on the and they come on the 16th. But if they lock there. If you're feeling it there and you're consistent with it, it fits. You know, fours fit with five. It does. If you can fit it in that space, right? It fits perfectly.
Absolutely.
And that's when, you know, count it. You just go with it. And the younger guys are really getting to that now. Some of the younger, real, you know, Kamasi Washington, the young guys here that I've known for many years, and Ryan Porter. I don't know if you know Ryan.
Yeah, I've heard the name. I've heard. Yeah. Well, I mean, those. Tell me a little bit about what you believe is the essence that they gone back far enough in history to understand the rhythms? I mean, what separates these cats from an assembly line cat who basically, you know, I mean, listen, I mean, the Schillinger School, which then became Berkeley, it used to be a place for already professional musicians to take time off the road or learn a new instrument. Now you're going there and you're going to rack up 30 grand maybe of debt, or if you're well off, you can pay it. But there's no guarantee you can become a professional musician, you know? So it's like,
no,
you know, like what was it that, go ahead.
Well, what I see, you know, as I say, we didn't have access to all of that. We had basic teaching, but there were no jazz programs really in schools anywhere to speak of locally. And so, but now they've got access to everything because the younger guys have access to us, you know, and they utilize it, man. These guys, I mean, on the internet, they're constantly on the internet seeking out information, and so they use their instincts, and also they have so many tools now because they can sit down. Just a couple of weeks ago, a stranger out here, there's a young brother, Fernando Pullum, who has he has a club of, you know, like a boys, not necessarily boys, but young kids camp kind of a situation where he mentors young people, and he has several bands, and he also has dance, and he teaches everything at his place over here, over in Leimert Place. And he called me. He said, "Man, you know, I want you to do something for me, but I don't know. What can you do?" He said, "I just want my kids to hear from you."
Yeah.
So what we decided to do, I said, "Okay, well, look, take a solo that I played." Now, these are very young guys. They're still high schoolers, just basically high schoolers. Take a solo and have them transcribe it. And what they did, I mean, he's got a tuba player. He has, you know, all the saxophones and trumpets and everything. And this tuba player really played. It was a solo that I played, I think, on Blue Train or something. With one of the things I did with Dave Grusin, the GRPL stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And when you hear it come back, and my critique is, well, the tuba says, but it's really so low on the tuba. I say, great, so why don't you play it up an octave? You never thought of that. So that became a whole study for him to play it up an octave where it feels comfortable, where you can hear what you're playing rather than mud, you know.
Absolutely.
And he did it. And it was wonderful. But say things like that, I never had anybody tell me that if a thing is out of my key, play it in another key. So I told him, I said, learn to play it in all the keys. So that's a study for the rest of the year. You know?
Let me ask you though, George. I mean, okay, so I agree with you. There are all the resources now, but unfortunately, we are saturated with material now, and people have to really seek in order to find the authentic stuff. And in the past, you guys were all of you learned by ear. Your ears were huge. You learned to play every tune in every key, and I think Fuller would probably, I mean, was probably responsible, but for this, but for you, but everybody was fiercely independent about wanting to get their own individual sound. And my thing today about music is, you know, when I'm seeing the Skipper or Theo Saunders, or you know, if I got a chance ever get a chance to see you live, or you know, everybody has their own unique sound. But yet, with the younger generation, there's so much material that it is easy. It is much more easier to comp than it is to find your individual sound. I mean, what do you talk to cats about today? Because I think the best way to find your individual sound in today's world is to completely unplug. But what do you say to cats in terms of finding their own sound?
Well, you know, the reality is, as far as voice, sound of voice, they're all unique. I mean, I can listen to a bunch of guys and hear, I can hear his sound, or I can hear who he's trying to sound like. You know, and you have to be real honest about that, because these guys, Hubbard, people like Freddie Hubbard, every trumpet player has pulled something from Hubbard.
Absolutely.
If he's going to be honest, but he doesn't have to quote Hubbard verbatim.
I love it.
You know,
I love it.
And that's where I tell guys, if you call and pick up the phone, you say hi George. I know that's Jake Steinberg, and I remember he's got a voice. And so right. I play the trombone, but I don't sound like Curtis. Curtis is unique. He got a little dancing thing. He always had the thing in his horn. I loved it, but I didn't play like that because my experience where I came from didn't sound like that. It came from a spirituality of people praying and mourning and you know, that kind of a vibe. Whereas, you know, and that's just where I came from. And then there were guys who, I give a lot of credit to guys in Detroit, because there always was some little out of the way thing happening where you could hear some music. There was a place called the Nakarima Club, which was American spelled backwards.
Wow.
And yeah, Nakarima, and they always had duos playing there. Frank Gant played there, and Hugh Lawson on piano.
Holy cow!
The Nakarima, and I lived right around the corner from Nakarima, so I'd run by there in the evening. It started early evening, probably 6 or 7 o'clock, and go, and I'd sit down and just listen to these guys play all this beautiful, these ballads. Just two of them, no rhythm set. Just the two of them, Frank Gant, and Hugh Lawson. But they wouldn't let me sit there long. They said, "Man, get your horn."
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't. I'm not ready. Man, get your horn. It wasn't asking me, but telling me.
They told you to go get them.
And they would alter it, and they were beautiful players. Hugh Lawson. A lot of you don't know Huey, but he was what a wonderful piano player. And those are the kind of vibes I came from. And it was spiritual in itself, because it was like, I'm going totally off the top. I'm not thinking, well, we're going to stay on a minor here, then we're going to go to play the 251. See, now, there's so much analysis going on. I mean, I did 20 years at UCLA, Jake, since I've seen you.
Wow. Well, no, dude. And by the way, it's Feinberg, by the way, FEI, and not Steinberg, but it's fine. The talk.
Did I say Steinberg?
Yes, it's fine. Tell me about academia. Like what doesn't work? Because it's too wonkish now. Instead of just going to the spirit. This is why I need Bohanon, because it's directly to the source. The lineage of your playing goes back to the source, the spirit. There was no book, and you guys were making up the rules, and amazingly enough, the music got pressed on vinyl.
Yes, it did. And, that was the greatest thing about it. We had to pay attention. We couldn't say, oh, well, I'll pick up one, I'll get the book, and I'll lay with that for a few weeks. And, we want to play the tune now, so, open up your head and hear. Let's go. and there's nothing like it. I can't, certainly now as you learn more about the music, and as things have become more complex, you certainly need to know more about the forms, because a lot of, we're in a space age. It's just, we are, and we're not depending totally on feelings. Now we're using concepts, and we're using different theories, and all of that comes to play in the music. So it has evolved into a different thing. A lot of guys that are playing today, the first thing they heard was Coltrane.
Right.
Right. They don't know Coleman Hawkins. They don't understand. The guys who were painting, and they were painters.
Dude, those guys were swinging so hard, and it was like the Buddy Boldens, like you go back to that early, George, we have a game. I've been doing a lot of shedding since I last talked to this cat, and we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this in for you right now, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay.
What you do, what I do, and most of the other people who have come up with any type of innovations, is you listen to what happened before you.
Right.
And it's very important to have a history of the music. And when I say history, I don't necessarily mean the written history of everybody's lives, although that's also very nice. But if you listen to the evolutionary of this music that we call jazz, you can go back to the music from the Bayou country that went into Dixieland, and from that morphed into swing and morphed into bebop and so forth and so on. But all of these are we'll talk about Dizzy Gillespie, for instance. Now, Dizzy, had a profound knowledge of music that happened before him. So when he started trying to play, what we would call different, it wasn't really different. It was just an evolution of what he had already heard.
What kind of? Go ahead. I would just know, I really am interested. What kind of? When you speak about earlier types of music, were you talking about stuff from the Middle East or different countries, or from just historical?
No, basically what happened here in this country. For some reason or other, when we do our historical research, we don't go out of this country when you're talking about jazz. You can go out of the country now because of communication is so much better now. So now you get a lot of musicians, even back in Dizzy's day. You started hearing music from other lands, and you started incorporating those elements into what you were doing. So here again, as I say, you're still dealing with something that you're building on. You're not just doing it to be different. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I absolutely.
All right, Mr. Bohanon, you want to take a guess at who that is? He's a cat. He's a cat that I bet you have maybe jammed with. I don't think you've. Anyway, that is the great Charlie Persip, drummer.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I wanted you to talk about, at UCF, in the academy, the idea that you have to do grading. Grading, Grading, becomes grating after a while, Grating, because how the heck are you supposed to grade originality? I mean, what are the things that work in academia, and what are the things that made you your eyeballs want to pop out of your head?
Well, it wasn't my idea to be in academia. To be perfect.
No, I know.
Kenny Burrell insisted. He knew me from Detroit.
Yeah,
and he
of course.
certainly opened
Of
the
course.
door, which is wonderful. But my experience, as we talk about grading, I think probably grading-wise, all my students got A's if they showed up. But the grading really was not, it was progress. Are we still at the same place as you were when we met? if we are, we haven't done any good.
Yeah, right. So they're getting, it's like, I mean, it's an A on paper, but they got to, I mean, right. So go ahead, continue.
So that was the incentive was to show me where you could take what we were working on a step farther, you know, and it was good for a while. But, you know, to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't. You get impressed with some of the technique of some of the young people because they've heard it. We hadn't heard a lot. Like I said, it still goes back to what have you heard up to this point. I don't care what you learned, but what have you heard? What's come through your head and touched you? You know, and the reality is, man, I've heard it. I've heard a lot, and I'm so grateful for that because I can reach back way beyond my time and still pick up something that is totally right on point today when I'm playing a solo. It just comes up. I don't order it. It comes up because that's where it fits.
You give an example?
You know. Well, say you're playing a tune and I might be playing a tune and then a happy thought comes to my head and I want to, you know, there's a happy thought, you know, and there's a circus tune comes through your head. So let it out, you know. It's not corny. It's real. It's honest again. It's relating to what you have heard, you know, and that's the kind of thing, you know, I appreciate more than anything when the younger musicians has enough knowledge of their lineage to reach and play some New Orleans in the middle of a bebop, because it's all relative. It all works.
Let me ask you something though. We talk about honest music, and you talk about this Hugh Lawson, Frank Gant, Insanity. Yeah. There's so much time to think today and intellectualize and to, you know, I mean, how much of the playing that you saw Fuller do and that you did yourself was spontaneous, in the moment creation? Isn't that the bottom line? The reason you're able to be honest about it is because the times that you were on the stand, you either fell apart or held it together. You had no time to think.
Right. Yeah, it kept you sharp and kept you thinking. Whereas now you can get paralysis through analysis. You know.
Wow. Listen, did you coin that? That's a great term. Did you coin that?
No, not really. I think I've heard it. Anything. I hear it
paralysis through analysis. I mean, because that is stifling. These cats, that's the pain. That's what breaks my heart, George, is like, I interviewed Kenny Burrell about this. He talked about, like, they have jam sessions in the student union. I mean, it's not really.
Man, Kenny used to hang out in the student union and play at Wayne.
Wayne, yeah.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that these cats don't have the opportunities. I mean, the Swamp Room, wherever Charles Lloyd discovered you, that hotel, they don't have the chance to play. They can play 6 nights a week, but they don't even get paid for it anymore. And that's the issue. It's the live, spontaneous opportunities every night.
I know. I don't know. I remember early in our conversation, you mentioned guys, you know, like me making more money than my parents did. Well, you know, and I look at how things. I was very fortunate. I can't tell you how fortunate, because one thing, I was open. I wasn't a hardcore bebopper to the point that I couldn't listen to anything else. Mm-hmm. But there were guys that were, and I love them, man, like Barry Harris. I understand.
The bop purist. Bohanon, there's so much going through my head right now. The thing I want you to, I'll let the floor is yours, because I really love this period in our history, and you were in a different little section of it. So basically, 65 is these Plug Nickel sessions that Miles's band had, where they fundamentally changed the vernacular. The vocabulary grew because they would leave the head of a standard like My Funny Valentine and then like quadruple the time, and then you'd lose where you kind of almost lose what the tune was, but then they'd come back in. And so you had this new burgeoning vocabulary in jazz, and that was the time that you joined Chico. And I wanted you to talk about, because everybody was listening to everybody else, how did that band increase and stretch the vocabulary of music at that time?
Well, several ways, and I didn't realize how challenging it would be until I was in it. First of all, Charles heard me, and he heard something in me. I'm sure he sat through a set, and we played all kinds of things.
Oh yeah.
First, and then even before that, with Kirk Lightsey, we played classical music, and take Bizet and people like that.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Are you serious?
Yeah, we used to adapt them for the kids, though. And play them in the junior high school.
Oh my God, this is insane.
We're happy seeing.
This is so great, man.
Wonderful classical player. Wonderful.
No. I just think it's so. I mean, did you have any rhythm section, or was it just all? You guys had your own inner time feel. That's the greatest thing. You didn't need a trap drummer.
Yeah, but we had one. You had, like I mentioned, George Goldsmith. I don't know if you.
No, I don't. Is he still around? Where's that cat?
Well, he's gone. But he was one of the guys who could play just fills. He knew when he had to play and but he wasn't a hard bebopper, but he was a wonderful, I say, painter. Guys who know exactly where to play what.
Yeah, definitely. It's insane.
And we don't have a lot of that now. But back to your question, when we just it's hard for me to gather all of this. It was so much, but we just knew that we had an opportunity to play what we were feeling, as opposed to trying to adapt to something. I mean, because it worked. You could hear the song. You could hear the melody all through your solo. You could still find the melody.
Right, exactly. No matter how far it got out, you didn't lose the song, but yet it's still. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like you spoke of Funny Valentine and things like that, and it was, but that was so beautiful because it was loose. It was so loose.
Dude, the people were painting. You said it. There's no painting today. The painting was just a wash in color. It was so beautiful.
Exactly. And it's wonderful how, Miles was the greatest. Not only, he was probably one of my biggest influences, Miles Davis, because he made you really understand that less is more.
Exactly.
But, the rest are as important as the notes. Things like that. Because where you breathe is really important. And if you don't breathe, if you're playing so much and you don't breathe, it's not natural, because anything that's alive has to breathe. You know what I mean? Things like that. And I talk to kids about that stuff, and it's like their eyes will open. I say, now you don't have to play a phrase until you're out of breath. I got some good young players out there. I've got a few young players who are going to be all right.
You know what? It's going back. I mean, I just did my second interview with the vibraphonist Mike Mainieri out of New York, and he grew up in the Bronx in tenement housing, basically unlivable housing. And by 1950, he got a gig on the Paul Whiteman show, and was able to buy his parents a house. And my point is that musicians were viewed as professionals. Maybe they didn't become millionaires, but they were viewed as professionals. And you sang for your supper. And I'm not saying there wasn't some dirty business and people didn't get ripped off once in a while, but I'm telling you, keep going back to these you got some young kids. Yeah, you know what? I bet you do. But you know what? I don't think our society sees a musician as a profession anymore. I think they see it as music as a musician's gift to the world, and how we got to that place is really deflating for me. This is I remember talking to Mike Clark, the drummer, and he said at a certain point in the studios, they'd say, because George Bohanon also never reject. It was all music to George Bohanon, and he's been on James Taylor records and all this beautiful crossover stuff. And Mike Clark remembers the producer saying, no, just, you know what, just don't play yourself. Just play straight beats. Just play that, what was the last pop hit. Just play that. Just play straight beats. So all of a sudden it was like the homogenization of sound, which is the biggest crisis in music, is that I can't tell who anybody is anymore. You put on Oscar Brashear from the early 70s, there's nobody that sounds like him. Nobody. Hadley Callman, nobody. George, nobody. I can't really tell anymore because everybody's comping, and I'm looking to this time in the studios, and Mike Clark's telling me that the producer's saying, don't be yourself, just play straight beats. Do you remember? I mean, being that you were part of so many different sessions and obviously did some overdubs, but a lot of times everybody was hitting at the same time. Was there a certain point where they tried to homogenize the sound of the horns, or do you remember this lean towards conformity as opposed to individuality?
Well, if we were playing as a unit, I can go back to Earth, Wind, and Fire, a lot of the stuff I did with them,
Hell yeah.
But there was a sound that was us that people wanted, and so it was an individual sound. People tell me they can recognize my horn in a band. I don't know that. Maybe they can. Maybe they're just flattering.
No, well, I mean, go in a big band. Go ahead.
But when we played as a group, me and Oscar Brashear, and you mentioned Hadley Callman and people like, but recording, when me and Oscar and Ernie Watts played together, it was a certain way that we think or we breathe, or we don't even talk about it. And it became a standard thing. They used that trio, me on trombone, Oscar on trumpet, and Ernie Watts on sax, on a whole lot of music.
And three of the greatest human beings in the world, man. That's and you guys had your own band, Karma, actually.
Yeah, we had Karma, and it's amazing how people still relate to that sound of Karma. I hear guys say, man, that was great. It was way ahead of its time. And we use that same, so it's hard, it's very difficult, Jake, because when you say individuality, especially if I'm working in a group, then we have to sound like a group. We can't sound like individuals, or else it doesn't blend. You don't want one playing vibrato and one playing straight tones and somebody else, slurring. So you have to. The studio requires is work. That's going to work. It's not just going to play. But you in that work, you still have to put your own interpretation into things, and that's when guys say, "Yeah, man, play it like that." That's because that's the way we felt it. That's not the way you wrote it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's when. Okay, so this is. I want to go back to this because Gary Bartz told me this. I mean, let's just break it down, because you said this thing about Earth, Wind, and Fire. You had your sound, you knew that sound. It was individual. The Crusaders had that sound. Okay, Buddy Rich's band had that sound. How much of this has to do, George, with the fact that, you eventually at a certain point you obviously had to learn to sight read music because you were in the studios and it was important. But you guys all learned by ear, and today's students are learning to read before they are learning to hear. And therefore, their ears are locked. And I want you to talk about how, I guess more to the point, how learning by ear helped your ears grow to the point where, that's why I think all these cats when you guys first came into the studios and people had that sound, it's because they all had learned by ear.
Yeah, they all were hearing. We were all hearing. And that's a good point. And I carry that on. I carried that on into today. I tell the guys when developing the solo, I say it's hard to play anything that you've never heard. because we've heard all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to develop your own thing, some of the things you play, you're going to repeat. You know, some of the things, just like when you learn to read, learn people's names, you repeat that name over and over till you can say their name. So you're gonna have to repeat some things, but you can only repeat what you hear. If you went through once and you didn't hear it, you don't know. You can't repeat it.
I just know that, like, I was born in '78, and all the records that I love, I mean, you're on a lot of them, and it's like, you can tell. I mean, it's just, there was like no, I know there was definitely people's personalities that were not always great, and, you know, you learn to sort of ignore the drama and just enjoy the music. But, I mean, I'll listen to, like, a Charles Kennard record, and it's just like the most burning funk tune, and dude, Charles is the band leader, and he plays a solo at the end after you and Arthur Adams and Jerry Rush play, and then he plays for literally less than a minute, and the song's over. I'm like, dude, he's the leader of the band, and he barely played a solo. I'm like, there was something really cool going on, and it had to do with there was enough to go around. There was a lot of sharing, and there was a lot of, like, opportunity. I mean, people would come out there. Gadsden would come out there. He was starving to death, and Kennard's like talking to Carol Kay about getting him gigs at Motown. Next thing you know, he's in Motown. I mean, it just there was a lot of work, George. I mean, Joe Porcaro, who I know you know, he was like telling Mike Maynard, he's like, dude, you have no idea how much money I'm making out here. I mean, you guys were like in the greatest pocket of time, and that's all these young cats. They can learn by ear, they can sight read, they can comp, they can be themselves. I just don't know how they're going to sing for their supper, man. I don't know how they're going to do it. To me, it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. It is hard, but a lot of them are recording, because they can record at home. They can put out their own product. They can go on. The internet has opened the world to them. So there are ways to make money, But, I was fortunate to do a studio thing, and the second year I moved to California, I bought a home. That was wonderful. I'm glad I did. Because I do it now.
It's not going to happen. No, I mean, do you remember, like, the earliest? I mean, Coffee told me that basically in about, I guess maybe, you'd have to go in, there'd be a chart, maybe a chord chart at Motown, but you'd have to crank out a song about every 3 hours or so. Can you talk a little bit about, like, what you took away most I mean, because today people have their own home recording studios, and you can ring a tune out so that there's no life left in it. When you guys really were on, like, a quick amount of time, you had to crank it out, and I just wanted you to talk a little bit about what you learned the most from those sessions. Jamerson, Benny Benjamin, Piss, all those guys, they could just paint. They were jazzers through and through. So, I mean, can you just talk about that improvisational methodology of jazz, how that came into, how that lent itself to the pop music and the hits that you guys were on?
Well, I think the guys who were producing, the Holland Doziers and Barry himself, they had a good ear for jazz anyway. Yeah. That was and as you speak of Jameson, they're the same guys that go and play jam sessions after they get out of the studio. They end up on their instrument. So it's always been that, that kind of attitude, the jazz attitude was always there. When they call the horns in, they already had the rhythm section down. So it wasn't like we had to struggle. I might come up with a lick, and which I did on several that I hear playing in Walmart. Yeah. Hear playing at Walmart now, like Mary.
1990 Temptations or something maybe.
Well, even before that, like playing on Mary Wells' "My Guy." Wow. Da 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 da, bum bum. That was me. I did that on my euphonium. I was just practicing Eddie Hayward's "Canadian Sunset" and Smokey heard it. Hey, I like that. What's that? That became an intro. He gave me a $200 incentive bonus.
Right. No, that you told me that in the first one. The guys were generous. If you came up with something, they'd hook you up with some more money or credit or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, but those kinds of times, you know, if somebody had, the producers couldn't write and we couldn't read, so we had to figure it out by what could we hear. Here the ears come in again. If you had good ears and a producer saying, well, look, I need a lick here, a dun, 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 dun. Well, no, okay, oh, well, I'll play that. The trumpet played the high note, well, I'll play dun, 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 dun. We weren't thinking third, fifth. We just hear, okay, all right, let's put it right there. Those are the kind we built horn charts because they weren't so full of music. They were just spots that we dropped. But some of them became real classic. You know, some of those things you hear the intro and you know what it is way before the song because of the music. Isn't that great? Today it's hard to do that.
Well, you know what it is. It goes back to we're really nailing this stuff. It's you know, I mean, did you work on ear training? Is that an emphasis at UCLA? To me, they should throw all the books. They should burn the books.
They won't because, you know, a lot of this came because of the era and the situation. There was nobody knowing how to write. You know.
Now, why did that happen? Why? Now, write creatively, right? I mean, we lost a lot of that creative genius writing.
I mean, like Holland and Deutscher had stuff in their heads they could hear.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you'd hear something, you know, or they would hear it in another situation and figured it might fit in their tune, you know. And so we were transplanting stuff in a lot of instances. So you had to have heard it, you know, or your ear was big enough for you to see how you could make it fit. They couldn't write it out and say, well, okay, we got after bar 8, we're going to do this.
Right. No, it's just, Gene Page, I mean, did you, oh, no. We lost this cat. No. Because, you know, you had Vince Montana in Philly, Sigma Sound. You had all the cats writing in New York. You had Holland Dozier and Bear. I mean, so then did it become more about like, because did it become more like conforming to the latest pop hit and everybody became very formulaic in their writing? I mean, Gene Page, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seemed to me the musicians had unbridled freedom, and at some point the bean counters came in and started telling musicians how to play, and that was the beginning of the end.
Yeah, because as I say, things became more commercial. I mean, Motown was known for love songs, just nice little, you know, love songs, you know, and so that was pretty much what we figured. The Temptations sang them, and all of the other groups sang love songs, the Four Tops. So we were all in the same bag pretty much. But there was a certain sound we got because we were using the same rhythm sections pretty much and the same small horn sections, a couple of, you know, even with the baritone sax with, you know, playing solos and things, just little things that became uniquely Motown. But, you know, it was great. And I'm backtracking some too because you had asked me about Charles Lloyd, and we didn't really get to that. Because
no, we need to get to that. Go ahead. Yeah, go where your mind takes you.
But anyway, but things like that. Charles came about with playing things in keys that we weren't accustomed to playing in. Charles liked to play in E and A and the sharp keys. We were B flat F players. So asking what did that's what I gained a lot from that experience with Chico and Charles, because Charles played in the hard keys, and which opened me up to the point, and then I could play in any key after that couple of years experience with them. So that was a great learning time. But Motown, again, they relied, you know, they had the same guys all the time, and Barry had set up sort of a continuation going on. If the Tops had a hit, we had to get something out by the Supremes, right? Well, if they had a hit, we've got to have something out, by the Temptations. I mean, and so it was just like a family of people that were constantly cranking out things. A whole lot of things never hit the street, believe me.
Oh, no, well, this is interesting. I mean, you're telling me that but every time though, it wasn't like Barry was like, it wasn't like we need to get the same kind of rhythm to every time it was different though. That's the magic of it, is that even though the rhythm tracks might have been laid down for the Four Tops, if you came in to do a temp session, it was a different rhythm track. It wasn't, they weren't trying to make a pop hit sound just like the pop hit before.
No, they just wanted to make a pop hit, but but Motown had a sound.
Right.
People realize the Motown sound, and maybe different things. When you think of Motown, I don't know if you think of rhythm section, if you think of Jamerson. I do. I think of Jamerson and Robert White and some of the funky licks they would play. Bass players used to just play the one, boom, 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 boom. These guys, boom, 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 boom. That was rhythm, man. So now everybody's trying to play like that.
This is really important for history. I mean, I want to be this is because Bohanon, the horn sections are getting neglected with Motown, and I'm not going to stand for it. This was the original Funk Brothers, and no fault of his. I mean, Dennis Coffey's a great cat. I'm just going to read these guys off, and then I want you to fill in the blanks. Johnny Griffin on organ, Earl Van Dyke piano, Jamerson bass, Pistol Allen and Uriel Jones on drums, Bongo Brown on congas, Ashford on tambourine, Jack Brokenshaw, and then the Australian vibist, and then Robert White, Joe Messina, and Eddie Willis and Coffey. Who were the horn cats at Motown?
Well, they varied a lot. There was
they did.
Self. There was.
Can you the Skype just dropped there? Can you start over again? I need to hear these names. Go ahead.
Okay, Herbie Lewis was one of the trumpet players. Along with, I'm trying to get these names together. It's been a long time, man.
I know, but it's important because they never get talked about.
No, and Hank Crosby, who became producer. He played tenor sax on a lot of the stuff. Eli Fontaine on alto saxophone.
Beautiful.
There was Paul Reiser, who became the great arranger on third trombone.
Wow.
And I was playing lead. There's another Robert, not Robert.
Herbie Lewis was. You're not talking about the bass player, right? There was a Herbie Lewis that played horn.
No. Herbie Lewis. Herbie Williams. I'm sorry.
Herbie Williams. Okay, very important. Okay, Herbie Williams. Yeah.
Herbie Williams on trumpet, and then there were. Then Marcus Belgraves did some of it.
Wow.
And Johnny Trudell, who was played with some of the other bands, the Caucasian bands. He did quite a bit of stuff in Motown. You mentioned Joe Messina, who played on one of the late night TV shows, playing guitar. But the horn wise. That was the nucleus with Eli Fontaine on alto, me on trumpet, and from Andrew Terry on baritone sax.
Wow.
Hank Crosby on tenor sax. Trumpets, Herbie, and Marcus on some. We had a lot of guys who were really fine players, and they didn't get a lot of. They didn't even get a mention on most of them.
No, I mean, Bohanon is anonymous on the Detroit Motown stuff. You begin to sort of see a little bit of it in when you get out to Los Angeles. Did you always have the full? Did you find? I mean, it's so interesting because, you and Lloyd were channeling that bone saxophone. Wilton and Wayne were doing it.
Yeah.
Did you always have the full brass with Motown, or sometimes it was just you, or maybe you and a Barry sax? Or, I mean, did you learn to find different combinations? Yeah.
Most of the time that I can recall, there was a section. There's at least a couple of trombones, 2 or 3 saxes, and a couple of trumpet players. It wasn't a big band, but but that was pretty much it. And there was no, we didn't do much doubling up. We just played it, and that was it. Now they take it, double, triple it, and make it sound like a huge band. But that was about it. It's hard. There's a couple other guys that I'm missing. It's hard.
You're doing fantastic, dude. You're throwing down Fontaine. I've never heard any of these cats before.
Yeah. He was a good alto player. He was a good jazz player, and had nice sounds. But he was.
No, because you always hear about Uriel, Pistol, Jamerson, Van Dyke. Those names are, but it's the horns, man. The horns never get talked about.
I think Eli was on that intro to Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On." I think that was Eli.
I want to ask you about when they so Jamerson was moved out, he wasn't doing very well, and they had, so Berry Gordy wanted Gene Page to write out the bass parts to what he thought Jamerson would play, except nobody could play them except for Wilton Felder, who could read flypaper, and that's why he became the bassist at Motown. I wanted you to talk about James Jamerson because, I feel like, I just know he wasn't in great shape. He wasn't treated necessarily fairly. A lot of the you moved out there and were like, okay, I'm just going to immerse myself in the studio scene. And like you said, you bought a house. Second year you were out there. What happened to Jamerson? What happened to what was the real story? Because this is insane. Like Motown, they're like, write out the bass lines that he would play. And nobody could play, and nobody could play him. I mean, Wilton obviously was a genius and could read, and he was the funkiest bass player. But what happened to Jamerson?
It's hard to know. Jamerson. I probably lost most of the guys because I came out here a little earlier than they did.
Sure, you did, yeah.
And I don't know. I think just off of the top, maybe Jamerson thought he would be much better received than he was. He was known as Motown's guy, and that's it. So with that tag on him, it didn't mean that he could go and play film scores, and because he wasn't a reader.
That's right. That's right. Interesting. Yeah.
He wasn't a reader. But those who knew him, respected him so much because what he did was so unique, and he set the trend. But I think he had habits.
Yeah, no, I know he was drinking a lot. I know he was really in bad shape. Yeah.
He was drinking a lot as a younger in Detroit. He was, and I think that he just. It's hard to say. There are a lot of guys who you would think when you see guys in certain contexts, you say, "Oh, these guys, they should be making a mint because they're so good." But it's not always about that. I was surprised at how many things. I was really fortunate and blessed that there were not a lot of black trombone players, first of all, in the studio.
Dude, you were rolling. What? By the way, I just want to play. We got one more Name That Voice for Bohanon. I think you might get this one. Take a listen to this, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Love to me is what makes everything go around. I think that love created the universe. I think that if you say you do not believe in God, you're an atheist or whatever. I respect that. I think we all need to respect how each other feels about things in life. But for you to say that you don't believe in God, and if you have a little daughter or a little son, and you look in their eyes, you can't tell me that you don't believe in love.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, God is love. So I don't think I need to go any further with that as far as that's concerned. And
mm-hmm.
I also believe that and especially at this time in the world, what's going on out there in the world, it's just insane. And we need to hold on to love. We need to hold on to what love is. We need to realize that there's a heavy struggle going on in the world, and I don't think any of us really understand. We don't understand it like we should. But I know one thing for sure, that this world needs love. It always did. Jackie DeShannon said.
All right, George Bohanon, who is that voice?
You got me on voices. I'm sorry.
I know, it's really hard. That was a cat I cannot wait for you to tell me about. That was my first interview with Jim Keltner.
Oh, Keltner, wow.
And I know that Keltner, when he came out, I know you came out a couple years before the rest of the Motown actually moved out there. Jim Keltner was a jazz snob. He was on the bandstand with Albert Stinson trying to play like Philly Joe Jones. And he was on Claire Fisher albums. And at a certain point, he's like, I got a family. I got to go to the studios where the money is. Hal Blaine gave him a break. And anyway, he was talking about, that was from 2014, about love. And I wanted you to talk about, basically, he used to go and sit at the Dragonwick and see Charles Lloyd and Bobby Hutcherson play all the time. And
okay.
How did you, well, first of all, what can you talk about Keltner, the playing with Keltner in these more maybe pop sessions?
But
yeah.
One thing about these, especially a lot of the rhythm section cats, a lot of times they're kind of cliquish.
Yeah, I dig.
To really say a lot, because we didn't hang out. I mean, I had a family. I really wasn't a hangout guy, man. When I came out here in '68, I said, well, if you're going to be out here, you're going to have to take care of business. And what I did is worked hard on meeting the guys who were doing what I thought I'd like to do. I met Oscar and met Ernie, and that was it. And we decided, then things started to happen. But Keltner, I admired his playing, because he always he could swing. He was versatile. I think that showed on me and Oscar and Ernie. One of the things that sticks out most to me was the versatility, because the music, when you heard something not quite in your genre, it didn't frighten you. Okay.
I love it, dude. I love it, man.
It didn't frighten you. You just say, okay, some of that, okay. We might even have a phrase or something. We could say something when the producer's trying to find out what he wanted, and we could say, okay, Bobby Blue Bland. Oh, yeah, boom. That would just put us in a mode to play this tune.
Exactly.
Things like that would happen all the time. And I think that's the importance of having the camaraderie and being of a like mind. Oscar, I love him. He was my best man at my wedding. I think I told you that.
Oh, I love that cat, man. The man was breaking sonic boundaries on Hampton Hawes records in the early. I've never heard somebody play. And Freddie Hubbard is insane. We let in with Freddie and Miles, but Oscar was. Is he playing anymore? What's going on with him?
He's not really performing. We talk all the time. He's my neighbor pretty much. And he's still, he's still my favorite person. He's a wonderful spirit.
Yeah.
And but he's had some challenge. He had a heart attack about a couple years ago and things like that. But he's okay. He's good. He's beginning to work out again and kind of try to keep his health in shape. He's single with a nice big house up in Baldwin Hills overlooking the city with a big nice big pool, and he doesn't swim, but
oh man, it's 108 degrees in Tucson right now. I'd love to jump in that pool. No, you know, I mean, can you? This is. Tell him I said hi. I love that cat. I just like, you know, how did you actually get in? You know, Keltner got his break from Hal Blaine. Earl Palmer gave Hal Blaine his break. How did you get into? You said there weren't many black trombone players, but who got you into the studios?
Well, this is a real, I'm going to make this short.
Sure.
When I came out here on a 10-day vacation, you know, I was saying, my wife and I said, let's just take a break. Detroit was kind of quiet, and there wasn't much happening, so we came out here. Virgil Rogers, do you know that name? He lives in Detroit.
I don't know that name.
No, Virgil was a trumpet. He is a trumpet player. His brother was Ernie Rogers. The Rogers brothers are well known in Detroit.
Wow.
They all were very studious guys and good mentors and things like that. I called him because he was living out here in Los Angeles, and he said, "Well, man, why don't you call me when you get there?" I called. He said, "Look, I'm doing a wedding reception at Western Avenue Golf Course Clubhouse. Why don't you come out and sit in and play with me?" And then I said, "Oh, cool." So I came out, sat in, playing ballads and different things, and the guy keeps going by, cupped his ear, listening to my horn. And long story short, it was Hal Batiste.
Holy! Are you kidding me?
Yeah, but we took a break, and this guy said, "Hey, man, I like your sound." I said, "Yeah, thank you." And it was a little uncomfortable. You know, I didn't want to hit him with my slide, but he kept coming by. He said, I really like your sound." He said, "Can you read?" I said, "Yeah, I was with Motown. I was just give him a quick, give me your number." Hal Batiste took my number. He gave it to a guy named George Poole, who was the contractor on doing a lot of string contracting. George Poole, every time I would go, I'd take my horn out, and then every time I played, I'd meet someone who would introduce me to someone. And then somebody told me about Lou Blackburn, who was a black trombone player here, who was moving to London. He was married to an English lady. They were moving to London, and so somehow I got into. They knew that the word was around the George Bohanon from Detroit, who was played with Motown on all these hits, was in L.A. And I started getting calls. You know, I started getting calls from some of the good contractors out here. Ben Barrett was one who was doing Motown stuff, and he'd call me occasionally, but he wasn't a fan of mine particularly. But anyway,
he just hold on. This is so legendary. Did you? You just said Lou Blackburn, and in my interview with Blaine, he was talking about the original Wrecking Crew: Tedesco, Glenn Campbell, Ray Paulman, Bill Pittman, Leon Russell, Steve Douglas, Jim Horn, and Lou Blackburn. So so basically you came in Blackburn. You basically you slotted in right where he left.
I took his chair. My timing was perfect. You know, as soon as I moved in, he moved out. He tried to sell me his house, and I almost bought it, but I like mine better.
All right, yo, listen, man. We've been going an hour 25 here. I'm sorry I kept you too long.
We got to cut it off.
Yeah, we'll cut it. Listen, tell Oscar I'm listening to his solos on Hampton Hawes every day. He needs to. I mean, he's taking me to a different planet. But Bohanon, you are the man. Stay safe, and let's not wait 8 years to do another one. All right.
Well, listen, I'm going to keep this number just for you.
No, no. This number's not the number I called you on this morning when you were still in your last quarter of sleep. That's the number you should save.
That was my landline. Nobody has landlines anymore.
Actually, landlines are. I called you on a land. Yeah. Anyway, you have the number, George. Much love to you, man, and I'll email you a copy of this interview too.
Okay, feel free to do any editing you can, because some of it wasn't, there were some pauses there. But,
yeah, it was a jam, dude. It was like you and Charles Lloyd on the bandstand, man. You're just working it out.
Okay, buddy.
All right, man.
Best to you.
Yeah, bless you, brother. Be cool.
Thank you.
Later.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great day on the Jake Feinberg Show. Happy 4th, everybody. We'll see you later.